Okay, this is video 2, a commentary on Soren Kierkegaard's works of love, and we're on chapter 2a, entitled You Shall Love. He opens the chapter with a quote from Matthew 22:39. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And in this chapter, he emphasizes the shall part of that command. Page 34. It is possible for anyone to misunderstand this, as if it were the intention of Christianity to proclaim self-love as a prescriptive right. He's saying that as a question. Is it possible for anyone to misunderstand this, as if it were the intention of Christianity to proclaim self-love as a prescriptive right? On the contrary, it is its purpose to wrest self-love away from us human beings. This implies loving oneself. But if one must love his neighbor as himself, then the command, like a pick, wrenches open the lock of self-love and thereby wrests it away from a man. If the command to love one's neighbor were expressed in a way different from this little phrase, as yourself, which is so easy to wield and yet at the same time has the tension of the eternal, then the command would not be able to master self-love in this way. The command implies, so he's saying, Christ's command, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The command in and of itself implies that we love ourselves. Some of the most self-destructive behavior, which from the outside can appear like self-loathing, is still the self-loving itself and seeking validation. If one is commanded to love their neighbor as themselves, then the command steals away self-love from yourself, as you cannot serve two masters at the same time. Any time spent loving someone else, you cannot spend loving yourself. In this command, it becomes clear that one, quote, he'll say later on, he says in this command becomes clear that one has, quote, struggled with one that is stronger, unquote. One who knows us deeper than any other and knows all our clever attempts at evading responsibility and ignorantly claiming a self-righteousness. What a terrible fight self-love puts forth in order to defend itself. And he says, yet Christianity decides it all with one single blow. When it tells self-love to show this same love to all others, thereby exposing the selfishness of the individual. And so he's saying, with this command, it becomes obvious that mankind is struggling with one more powerful than himself. That this command comes from God. This is not a command that comes from man. Because man would not give a command that totally takes away everything he values, which is himself. He's saying this command does it because it's saying, I know you love yourself, so just love every single other person with that same love. And he's saying by that he just he destroys all man's sense of his own self-righteousness, and takes away from him his selfishness, if he's to take the commandment seriously. Page 36. There is only one whom a man can with the truth of the eternal love above himself, that is God. The only one who can, in truth, be loved more than oneself is God. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind, is what we're told in other places by Christ. When the poets talk such nonsense about loving another person more than God, is because their love is secretly self-love. And we'll talk more about this later on. Because in this section, he's talking about the poet who can talk about loving someone else, loving another person, their beloved more than themselves. And he's saying, we can't justifiably love anyone else more than ourselves, unless it's God. He says, when the poets talk such nonsense about loving another person more than God, is because their love is secretly self-love. Anyone who dared to love themselves or another person in this way would be in sin, because it would be idolatry. And so it's just, we'll talk more about how just romantic type love is actually secretly or unconsciously self-love. And so anyone who's loving someone else this way is actually loving themselves ultimately. And they're saying, I think what he's saying is that this is ultimately idolatry, because we should all be loving God ultimately more than anything, more than ourselves also. So anyone who's claiming to love another person that way is committing idolatry, even though it's ultimately loving themselves. The only escape. So he's talking about the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. And he's saying the only escape from this commandment is the one which the Pharisees in their time also tried in order to justify themselves, to let it be doubtful who one's neighbor is, in order to get him out of one's life. He's saying there's no way to get around this commandment. He's saying there's only one potential escape out of the commandment that came from Christ, to love your neighbor as yourself. And he's saying it's the same one the Pharisees tried in his day. Well, who is my neighbor? The only possible evasion from this unrelenting command is to question who one's neighbor is. This is exactly what the Pharisees did. The word neighbor means, quote, near dweller. So it is the one who is right next to you. Not in the sense of favoritism, for, quote unquote, do not the heathens also do the same, unquote. The neighbor is, quote, just as near, or ought to be just as near to you as you are to yourself, unquote. And is that by which the selfishness in self-love is to be tested. This is how our self-love is tested. By loving the neighbor. And this is the one who's next to you. Who's that? Well, who's next to you? And this is how the degree of our selfishness and our self-love is to be tested. And I think anyone who endeavors to even try to carry this out just sees how much selfishness is in our hearts. And shows us this shows us how much we actually need a Savior. And how much we can't live up to the commandments apart from his grace. And so no unredeemed can just pick up the Sermon on the Mount and be like, okay, I'm just going to carry this out. Sometimes I think it has a dual purpose. It's to show us our inability to carry it out, which leads us to repentance, shows us that we need Christ as our Savior. But then once we're born again, I do believe through the Spirit of God, we're to strive to fulfill this. And I think there's an ongoing repentance that occurs, because I think the more you strive, the more you see the sin and selfishness that's within you. And it leads to just an ongoing repentance. And, even as we make progress and do make some strides into becoming like Christ, we still always have to rely on him. He said, apart from me, you can do nothing. And so I think we need to really take that seriously. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing anything after we're born again. We can do things. We can do works pleasing to God after we're born again by God's grace. Page 38. By recognizing your duty, you easily discover who your neighbor is. For that I wrote, finding a lover or a friend can be a difficult business, but the neighbor is easy to find, to the one who recognizes their duty through the command. Yeah, so he says, this is page 38. By recognizing your duty, you easily discover who your neighbor is. So yeah, whether it's us looking for someone to fall in love with, or, finding like a true friend, this can be very difficult. But the neighbor is easy to find, to the one who recognizes their duty through the command. And I think that's what he's saying. So when you actually recognize your duty, when you actually understand what it's actually saying, it's not hard to discover who your neighbor is. There's enough situations that'll present themselves when I think the Spirit of God moves on your heart. It's like, this is your neighbor. Page 39. The command reads thus: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if the command is properly understood, it also says the opposite. You shall love yourself in the right way. Christianity teaches one how to properly love themselves. And if they do not do this, then they cannot love their neighbor properly either. He says that the law is therefore, quote, you shall love yourself in the same way as you love your neighbor when you love him as yourself. I think it's what he's kind of implying what the commandment is saying. So let me see, there's another. Yeah, so also on 39, it says, when the activist wastes his time and powers in the service of vain, inconsequential accomplishments, is it not because he has not rightly learned how to love himself properly? Or not, yeah, because he's not learned how to love himself. When the frivolous person throws himself, almost like a non-entity, into the folly of the moment, is it not because he does not understand how to love himself rightly? When the melancholic dejectedly desires to be rid of life, of himself, is this not because he will not learn earnestly and rigorously to love himself? When a man surrenders himself to despair because the world or some person has left him faithlessly betrayed, what then is his fault? His innocent suffering is not referred to here, except that he does not love himself in the right way. When a man in self-torment thinks to do God a service by martyring himself, what is his sin except not willing to love himself in the right way? Alas, when a man presumptuously lays violent hands on himself, is not his sin just this, that he does not rightly love himself in genuine understanding of how a man ought to love himself? There is a lot of talk in the world about treachery and faithlessness, and God help us, it is all too true. But still, let us never, because of this, forget that every man has in himself the most dangerous traitor of all. This treachery, whether it consists in selfishly loving oneself or in selfishly not willing to love oneself in the right way, treachery is certainly concealed. Yeah, so he's just giving all these different examples. Whether it's someone who's just frivolous with their life and their time, whether it's an activist spending all their time on what he calls vain and inconsequential accomplishments, someone who's filled with melancholy and dejectedly wants to be rid of life. He talks about the person who surrenders to despair because the world has let them down and has betrayed them, or someone who ends their own life or someone who just gives themselves up to martyrdom in a very frivolous, I guess, kind of way. He's saying these people are not loving themselves in the right way. And I think he's also going to, kind of imply, like, these people cannot properly love their neighbor either. Because he says, like, you shall love your neighbor in the right way. And there will be more on that. Yeah, and he says, because he says on that previous passage, every man has in himself the most dangerous traitor of all. And he says this treachery consists in selfishly loving oneself, or in selfishly not being willing to love oneself in the right way. And so, yeah, we can be confused about these things, about the world. We get down on ourselves, but, if we're following Christ, the Spirit guides us to love ourselves in the right way. And His Spirit will lead us along that path so that we don't remain in these past conditions where that He spoke about, where we're basically wasting our lives. We're not loving ourselves in the right way. We're not spending our time the way God would want us to. We're caught up by loving, a lot of times it's loving the world. John says all that's in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. It's of the world, and it's passing away. And that's what comprises the world. And oftentimes, because we're loving the world, and when things aren't working out properly, or in a way that we approve of in our own life, in relative to the things of the world that we desire, then we're dejected or whatever else, and we're let down. But that's not loving ourselves in the right way. And that person cannot actually love their neighbor in the right way. You shall love. This, then, is the word of the royal law. And truly, my reader, if you are capable of forming a conception of the conditions in the world before these words were spoken, or if you strive to understand yourself and give heed to the lives and dispositions of those who, although they call themselves Christians, really live within pagan concepts, then in relation to this Christian imperative, as in relation to everything Christian, you will humbly confess with the wonder of faith that such a command did not spring up in any human heart. In Christianity, love is a duty, something seen as a contradiction in the world where love is chosen and is only shown preferentially. So, yeah, I think there's more in this passage that should probably be read. Now, after it had been commanded throughout Christianity's 18 centuries and previously in Judaism, now, when everyone is instructed in this and spiritually understood, is like someone brought up in his parents' comfortable house and almost made to forget that daily bread is a gift. Now, when by those brought up in it, Christianity is slighted in favor of all kinds of novelties, as when good food is slighted in favor of confections by someone who has never been hungry. Now, when Christianity is presupposed is known by all, as given, and is alluded to in order to proceed further, now this law of love is repeated by everyone as a matter of course, and yet how seldom perhaps it is observed. How seldom perhaps does a Christian earnestly and gratefully ponder with comprehension what his condition would have been if Christianity had not come into the world. Yeah, so in Christianity, love is a duty, something seen as a contradiction in the world where love is seen as something you choose. Like you choose to love certain people and you show it preferentially to some and not to others. This has been causally accepted in the modern world where people no longer consider its implications. Yeah, he's saying, this idea of you shall love your neighbor, people just casually accept it, like especially, Western world or, places where Christianity has been for a long time. It's just, it's casually accepted. And people no longer consider the implications. But if a pagan were to hear this command, they would be offended, as they would understand what's being said. And so, I think he's saying we have lost the force of this commandment because we've heard it so often. Just like, yeah, you love your neighbor as yourself. But he's saying the person who actually hasn't been influenced by Christianity, like the pagans hear this, they'll be offended. Like that's the point. I mean, anyone who is hasn't been influenced by Christian thinking culturally, will think that this command, if they actually understand, if it's said in a way that's actually understood, they'd be offended because it would be considered ridiculous. Like, oh yeah, you just love everybody. That's just not human nature. We love those who we think are wonderful in certain ways. Beauty, genius. We love those who are like us, that are like us. And he's saying the pagan would actually understand the force of this and be offended. And when someone's actually offended, they have the ability to actually truly understand what's being required and truly believe too. It's not like someone who actually doesn't understand the force of it casually accepts it, but has not really apprehended it. What a difference there is between the interplay of the powers of feelings, of urges, of inclinations, and of passions. In short, the interplay of the powers of the spontaneous life, the artistically celebrated glory of the immediate life in smiles or in tears, in desires or in wants. What a difference there is between this and the earnestness of the eternal, the earnestness of the command in spirit and in truth, in uprightness and in self-renunciation. But human ungratefulness, what else has such a shorter memory? What else has such a short memory? Because the highest good is now offered to everyone, men take it as nothing, discern nothing in it, to say nothing of becoming personally aware of its extraordinary quality, just as if the highest good had lost something, because every man has or may have the same. Yeah, he's just making the point that how different that the love of what Christianity talks about and the love that he just just the typical love of eros, romantic love, that's based in feelings of urges, of inclinations, of passions. In short, the interplay of the powers of the spontaneous life, like it just springs up. That's how that sort of love happens, the sort of infatuation, right? He's saying how different that is, that life that's artistically celebrated. He's like, how different is that life, that love, than what Christianity is offering. And he's also saying in Christianity is offering is not taken seriously because it's offered to everyone, as opposed to this love is only offered to the greatest, to the most lovely, to the most brilliant. That exclusivity makes it seem like it's important. And he's saying because Christianity is offered to all, he's saying because of that, it has a tendency to not be taken seriously. You shall love. Only when it is a duty to love, Only then is love eternally secured against every change, eternally made free in blessed independence, eternally and happily secured against despair. However joyous, however happy, however indescribably confident, instinctive, and inclinational love, spontaneous love, can be in itself, it still feels precisely in its most beautiful moment the need to establish itself, if possible, more securely. Therefore, the two pledge. They pledge fidelity or friendship to one another. And when we talk most solemnly, we do not say of the two, quote, they love one another, unquote. We say, quote, they pledged fidelity, unquote, or, quote, they pledged friendship to one another, unquote. But what then? But what then do they swear of this love? We shall not confuse the issue and be distracted by calling to mind the great variety of invocations used by poets, the spokesman of this love. For in relation to erotic love, it is the poet who makes the two promise, the poet who joins the two, the poet who prophesies an Eden for the two and lets them swear. In short, the poet is the priest. So he's saying in this section, this inclinational love, or the eros, the erotic love, right, that just springs up, that's inclined to one person and not another, that's loved in exclusion of all other. They try to make pledges, right? And then the poet, he's saying the poet is the priest of this type of love. Does this love swear then by something which is higher than itself? No, this it does not do. Because you could pledge our love like before God, And he's saying, do they actually pledge this love by something else higher? No, it doesn't do this. Precisely, this is the beautiful, touching, enigmatic, poetic misunderstanding. That the two do not themselves discover it. And for this very reason, the poet is their sole beloved confidant, because he does not discover it either. When erotic love swears fidelity, it really gives to itself the significance by which it swears. So he's saying the whole significance, like we don't swear, we just swear by the love itself. Therefore, it not only does not swear by something higher, but really swears by something which is less than itself. This love is indescribably rich in its own loving misunderstanding, just because it is itself an infinite richness, an unlimited certainty. When it wishes to swear, it swears by something poor, but it does not itself realize this. The result is that this swearing, which should be and honestly think itself to be the highest seriousness, is nevertheless a most beguiling jest. As this mysterious friend, the poet, who has the closest confidant, has the best understanding of this love, does not understand it either. Yet it is easy to understand that if one is really to swear, he must swear by something higher. Then God in heaven is the only one who is truly in a position to swear by himself. But the poet cannot understand this. That is, the individual who is a poet can well understand it. But insofar as he is a poet, he cannot understand it, inasmuch as the poet cannot understand it. For the poet understands everything in riddles, and marvelously explains everything in riddles. But he cannot understand himself, or understand that he himself is a riddle. If he were compelled to understand this, he would, if he did not become indignant and embittered, sadly say, would that this understanding had not been forced on me. It disturbs me, what is the most beautiful to me. It disturbs my life, and yet I can make no use of it. Thus far, the poet is right in the matter. For true understanding means the decisive settlement of the life problem of his existence. Erotic, romantic love, eros, in the Greek, it does not swear by something higher than itself. This is supposed to be its glory, that love itself is the guarantee. But this is frivolous. One must swear by something higher, but the poet only exists in riddles and refuses to understand this because it disturbs what is most beautiful to them, this mystical, ambiguous, erotic love. Saying the poet doesn't want to understand this idea. There is the impression we experience that the poet or artist appears to explain everything. This is the impression good, secular art can have on us. But it is an illusion because it does not explain the contradictions in what it puts forth. How can this exalted love they speak of end up so disastrous? How can it blossom in such glory only to pass away and die? What are we to make of such love? Art does not explain this contradiction. The vague but beautiful impression it leaves is a riddle that appears to explain everything, but it doesn't. What of tragedy, a perennial aspect of art? How could this exalted love end up in tragedy if it is secure against change? I have here a quote from Tolstoy. He says, quote, "How perfect is the delusion that beauty is goodness," unquote. Think about how much high-flown great art has been created in praise of beauty. Yet beauty does not contain truth in any way. Yet art would have us believe that it does. For true understanding means the decisive, this is a quote from Kierkegaard. For true understanding means the decisive settlement of the life problems of existence, unquote. The poet avoids the issue of their contradictory explanation of love and thereby do not settle the problems of this life. The poet does not detect this is page 46. The poet does not detect the misunderstanding that the two swear by their love to each other forever instead of swearing by the eternal their love to one another. The eternal is the higher. If one is to swear, then one must swear by the higher. But if one swears by the eternal, then one swears by duty that one shall love. He's talking about this is secure. As we started out, he said, I was on page 44. He says, only when it is a duty to love, only then is love eternally secured against change, which is changes the nature of erotic love, or of natural romantic preferential love. And he's saying this is the riddle of the love that is spoken of the artist, that, that they never make sense of this, right? Because these people, they swear by their love, but it's always subject to change. And he's saying, only when it is a duty to love, only then is love eternally secured against every change, eternally made free in blessed independence, eternally and happily secured against despair. How is that? Well, that's by the command. You shall love. It's a duty. Now, if the two are swearing by the eternal, then they're swearing by this. They're swearing by this command. And once both have a duty to love one another, then their love is secure. Otherwise, it's not. And it's bound to end in despair, which is the riddle of the poet. Two should swear by the eternal for their love to one another, but the poet would have them swear by their love itself for their love for one another. Once one swears by the eternal, it then becomes a duty to love, and the poet cannot endure this. It's just aesthetically, this is not pleasing to the poet to hear this. It's much more I guess, aesthetically or sensually pleasing to just praise the love itself and assume that, this is what we swear by. Swearing by the eternal, that's not, that's not so, I guess, aesthetically, it's hard. How do you aesthetically praise that in song? It's not as, I guess, vague and, I guess, unrealistic in a pleasing way, or, surreal, I guess. I guess there's something about praising the love itself, as the bringing in the third term, which is God, because it seems God always brings the command, the duty, and that would seem to take something away from the poetic conception of preferential love, to the poet. Therefore, this spontaneous love has, according to the beautiful understanding of the imagination, the eternal in itself, but it is not consciously grounded upon the eternal, and consequently it can be changed. So let me read that again. Therefore, the spontaneous love, the preferential love, eros, has, according to the beautiful understanding of the imagination, saying not in reality, but in the imagination, it has this idea that it has the eternal in itself. Like, our love for each other just has this element in our imagination as having the eternal in itself. But it's not grounded upon the eternal. So that's what he's saying. That's the contradiction. We can assume like, this feeling is like so strong. Like, yes, it has eternity in it, our love for one another. He's saying, but it's not grounded in the eternal. It's actually not grounded in God, where duty is required. And he's saying, because it doesn't have this element, in the imagination, it seems like it has the eternal. It doesn't. He says, consequently, it's because of that it can be changed. It can change into something else. Spontaneous love, when we are overtaken by falling in love, appears to have the eternal element in it because of the, quote, beautiful understanding or misunderstanding of the imagination, unquote. Because it is not truly grounded in God, the eternal, this love can be changed over time. Even if it doesn't change, it is possible that it can be, and therefore it can cause the anxiety of uncertainty. When love has undergone the transformation of the eternal by being made duty, it has one continuity, and then it follows of itself that it survives. When love has become duty, it is sure to survive the whims of change. The love which simply exists, however fortunate, however blissful, however satisfying, however poetic it is, must still survive the test of the years. But the love which has undergone the transformation of the eternal by becoming duty has one continuity. There is no need to test this sort of love, because by its very nature, being grounded in the eternal, it endures. Consequently, only when it is a duty to love, only then is love eternally secure. This security of the eternal casts out all anxiety and makes love perfectly secure. For in that love, which has only existence, however confident it may be, there is still an anxiety over the possibility of change. Testing certainly has its basis in love, but this violently flaming desire to test and this hankering desire to be put to the test explain that the love itself is unconsciously uncertain. So, let me see here. Yeah, now he's talking about testing love. Two people in love, because of the uncertainty, there's always uncertainty. Here comes the reason for testing the love, to see if it is what we believe it is. Spontaneous love is uncertain because it has not yet become duty. So yeah, if you don't have the duty to love the person you're with, then there's always going to be uncertainty of whether or not love is there. And he's saying because this is where testing comes from. And he says it has its basis in love, but this violently flaming desire to test and this hankering desire to be put to the test, even desire to be tested because I want to prove my love, right? This shows that love itself, this love is unconsciously uncertain. So there's anxiety here. They're uncertain of whether this love is actually true or not. And he's saying that's because it lacks duty. Never has any greater security been found, and never shall the peace of the eternal be found in anything other than in this you shall. He's saying it's only in the you shall that you will have security. Faith has encompassed all contingencies. So that's him. That's what he's saying. He's saying, yeah, so testing your beloved can never test for every possible situation in which love could be put to the test. But faith believes and loves as duty, and therefore cannot be disappointed. You can always choose to love, despite how another acts towards you. And that's why he says faith has encompassed all contingencies. No matter what happens, you can always believe in love and continue loving despite how the other acts towards you, and still love as duty regardless of circumstances. For that love which has only existence can be changed. It can be changed within itself, and it can be changed into something else. Spontaneous love can be changed within itself. It can be changed to its opposite, to hate. Hate is a love which has become its opposite, a ruined love. When a relationship has been ruined and one still loves, it can turn to hate. If they're loving in the wrong way, right? With spontaneous love, when the love dies, so too does the hate. I wonder how much of this has to do with our resenting someone who doesn't live up to the ideals we've projected onto them. Yeah, he says it can become jealousy. He talks about how love can become jealous. So spontaneous love can be changed within itself. He says by spontaneous combustion, it can become jealousy. How then is this simple love secured against jealousy? I wonder if it is not by avoiding comparisons in loving. It does not begin by spontaneously loving according to preference. It just loves. Therefore, it can never reach the point of morbidly loving in accordance with comparisons. It just loves. Love can avoid the poison of jealousy. So he's saying true love, dutiful love, God's type love, the agape, which is, that's what we'll end up talking about. It's the love, the word that's used in the scriptures for love most of the time. It's agape. So love can avoid, this true love can avoid the poison of jealousy by not comparing your love to the one you are loving, while also not loving in accordance to your preference of what the beloved should be. It just simply loves. And he's saying that, I think, he's talking about this on this section after how it can turn to jealousy, it can turn to hate. Because if you're always comparing how much you're loving as opposed to the beloved, that can be grounds for resentment or jealousy, like, of wondering why they're not loving you the way that you believe you're loving them. You're also not loving them according to your preference of what the beloved should be like, because that can also lead to resentment and turn to hate, right? It's like, they're not living up to my projections of what they should be. So we tend to idealize people and project what we desire them to be. We project the things that we want them to be onto them, and when they don't live up to those things, we can be discouraged and frustrated. And he's saying when it's dutiful to love, it just simply loves, and it avoids these changes that can occur of love being changed into hate or jealousy. Love is exhausted in the lukewarmness and indifference of habit. Alas, of all the enemies, habit is perhaps the most cunning, and it is cunning enough never to let itself be seen. For he who sees the habit is saved from the habit. Habit destroys love, but by noticing the habit by which you are conducting yourself with your beloved, you can avoid being subject to its degenerating effects on your relationship. Page 52. Only when it is a duty to love, only then is love made eternally free in blessed independence. When you love as a duty, you become truly free. Your life is not determined by the behavior of another. Otherwise, we're in bondage to someone else's behavior. I mean, we're not free if our peace and our well-being is determined by how someone else is acting, then we are not truly free. And he's saying the duty to love, when you've resigned yourself to Christ's commands, and you're going to love your neighbor, you're going to love even your enemy, there's an independence. You are no longer bound to this other person and their behavior. So you're truly free. You're truly independent. If one were to say, either love or die, and thereby signify that life without loving is not worth living, we should say that he is absolutely right. But if he understood it to mean that possession of the beloved, and consequently to mean either to possess the beloved or die, either win this friend or die, then we must say that such a misconceived love is dependent. He's saying that sort of love is dependent. Someone whose motto is, quote, either love or die. So I'm either going to, if he's saying, if they mean by that, I'm going to either possess my beloved or die. He's saying this is such a misconceived love, and it's totally dependent on this other person. It's an unhealthy love. It's not the love that God intends us to have for people. And you don't ever want to put that love on someone else either. That's an enormous burden for someone else. Living life without loving is indeed empty, but this is not to say that love means possessing your particular beloved. This kind of love is dependent and it's not free. Here, this is just an aside. When we are dutiful towards the law, we are free in regards to the results of our life because God is now responsible for this. But when we acknowledge no authority, we're in bondage to the results of our own decisions. So he's saying, that's just to say, when we're not acknowledging God's law, when we're not acknowledging God's law, when we're not loving out of duty, so then we're going to be responsible, and we're going to be in bondage to the results of our decisions. Whereas when you love out of duty, you're absolutely free because you're living in accordance with God's law. And so you are leaving all the results to him. And there's a total peace and independence there, a total freedom. When that's the case, when you're loving as he commands you, you just leave everything with him and you can be at peace. In this way, the you shall makes love free and blessed independence. Such a love stands and does not fall with variations in the object of love. It stands and falls with eternity's law, but therefore it never falls. So when there's variations in the object of your love, like if your beloved is changing, when you dutifully love, you never fall. He's saying your love does not fall. And now if it's based on it's based on just the whims, it's not based on duty, it's just the nature of the love, then whenever the object of love changes, like your beloved changes, well then your love's going to fall. He's saying, but when you're in line with God's law to dutifully love, you continue loving and you'll never fall. You'll never be put to shame. He says, love abides. It is independent. Unchangeableness is true independence. So if you're just like, I'm just going to always love, no matter what the situation, continue loving. He's saying that's true independence. Despair's power, however highly it is regarded, is nevertheless impotence. Its utmost is nothing more nor less than its defeat. Yet that spontaneous love can reach the point of despair, proves that it is in despair. That even when it is happy, it loves with the power of despair, loves another person, quote, more than himself, more than God. I just got to plug the phone in. It's going to die soon. Okay. So just other sort of comments on this. So yeah, anything that's in a state of change is dependence. That can be true of just other mental states that we have. So if things like affect our mental state, their ability to be changed, in some sense, you're dependent on those external circumstances or that person that is causing your state to be changed. When we change our love because of someone else's love towards us, we're dependent on them. The one who's truly independent loves regardless of change and is thereby free. Spontaneous love can become unhappy, can reach the point of despair. So this is before that earlier passage, so I'll just reread it. Spontaneous love can become unhappy, can reach the point of despair. Again, this might seem to be an expression of the strength of this love. Saying, oh yeah, look at the despair that I'm in. Like, this just proves like the love is there. So this might seem to be an expression of the strength of this love, that it has the power of despair, but this is mere appearance. Despair's power, however highly it is regarded, is nevertheless impotence. Its utmost is nothing more nor less than its defeat. Yet this, that spontaneous love can reach the point of despair, proves that it is in despair. Even when it is happy, it loves with the power of despair. Loves another person, quote, more than himself, more than God. Despair can deceitfully seem to indicate the power that love is present, but this is a deception. Zeal never indicates truth. Many atrocities have been committed by individuals that were passionately convinced of the virtue of their cause. We don't put down rabid animals because there's truth in their enthusiasm. We put them down because they're nothing but a threat to everyone around them. So that's just to say that, we can't, however zealous we are, does not mean we're in the truth. In just the same way, he's saying, because someone can despair strongly over love does not mean love is present. It's a deception. He's saying the person, because we can despair so much over this, shows that we're already in despair, because we're loving in the wrong way. And so that person who loves in the wrong way, does not love themselves in the right way, is actually saying they're already in despair. To be in despair is to not know who you truly are. The despair lies in relating oneself with infinite passion to a single individual. For with the infinite passion, one can relate to oneself, if one is not in despair, only to the eternal. Sorry, let me read that again. The despair lies in relating oneself with infinite passion to a single individual. For with infinite passion, one can relate oneself, if one's not in despair, only to the eternal. Yeah, he's saying the despair relies in that you as an individual are relating yourself. You have infinite passion for a single individual, but they're not an eternal being. He's saying that the infinite passion that we have in love can only be directed towards God. So despair is the result of directing eternal passion towards something that's not eternal. We suffer immensely, despair, in romantic love when we love with infinite passion, a finite creature. This motivation to love with infinite passion can only be directed to an infinite object, the only one of which is God. Circumstances cannot cause us to despair, but can only reveal that we were already in despair, i.e., relating ourselves with infinite passion to a finite object. When everything is going well in a relationship, the despair is not apparent. But when this falls apart, it becomes clear that the person who is lost in despair was not being eternally minded. To despair is to be lost in the ever-changing course of temporality. this is the nature of temporality, change. You know, I mean, we're temporary beings, and the nature of our temporal existence is change. And so to be in despair is to be lost in that ever-changing temporality and not be relating ourselves properly to the true object of our love, which is God. By heeding the voice of God that commands, you, quote, you shall love, our love is transformed from the temporal realm, where circumstances can render us unable to possess the one we love, to the eternal realm, where our love can continue forever, regardless of circumstances. This love is never wasted, as love can appear in life when it is unrequited, or when circumstances render us unable to possess in time the one we love. So yeah, this love is never wasted, because it can still be present. It can still be present if love is unrequited, or when circumstances render us unable to love them in time. Like if they're not here, we can just still love. We can just continue loving. And so that love is never wasted. Yeah, he says, when it is made impossible to possess the beloved in time, the Eternal says, you shall love. That is, the Eternal then rescues love precisely by making it eternal. When it says you shall love, it says your love has an eternal worth. Quote, you shall sorrow, unquote, is both true and beautiful. This is page 57. I do not have the right to harden myself against the pains of life, for I ought to sorrow. But neither have I the right to despair, for I ought to sorrow. Furthermore, neither do I have the right to stop sorrowing, for I ought to sorrow. So it is also with love. You have no right to harden yourself against this emotion, for you ought to love. But neither do you have the right to love despairingly, for you ought to love. Just as little do you have the right to misuse this emotion in you, for you ought to love. The command consumes and burns out what is unsound in your love, but through the command you shall be able to kindle it again. When humanly considered, it would cease. Passion makes our love fiery and irrational. Worldly wisdom would like to extinguish this passion with common sense, but the command of the Eternal purifies both. The Eternal will not let us love despairingly, but neither will it allow us to kill off our love in a desperate attempt to protect ourselves. By commanding us to love in the right way, we will continue to love passionately, but in such a way that our love is eternal and filled with truth and life, not delusion and despair.